Chicago. December. The city glimmered like a cold jewel, its lights reflecting on the glassy surface of Lake Michigan. Beneath the heavy gray clouds, a young woman slipped quietly between towering buildings, her footsteps light and careful, as if even her breath might echo too loudly. Elena Monroe worked at the Sullivan Estate, a historic mansion perched on the West Town Hill, where golden light always spilled from enormous glass windows. For 6 months, she had learned to move like a shadow to clean, arrange, polish, and then disappear. For her silence was survival. People said Henry Sullivan didn't need staff, only perfection. Officially, he was a logistics magnate. But the whispers told another story, that he ruled half of South Chicago, where law blurred the moment the sun went down. Elena had never faced him directly, only heard his footsteps, heavy, measured, pulsing with authority. Every time those shoes echoed down the hallway, she shrank deeper into the dark. That night, rain fell like silver pouring from the sky. Elena finished her shift late, a fabric bag slung over her shoulder, her thin coat no match for the cold. The walk from the Sullivan Estate to the train station was only 3 blocks short enough for most to feel safe, but tonight felt different. The streetlights flickered, a black car idled by the curb engine humming. Elena lowered her head and walked faster. At the second corner, 2 men stepped out from an alley. "Where are you rushing to, sweetheart?" A raspy voice called behind her. Elena clutched her bag tighter and quickened her pace. Footsteps followed. A hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. "Let go!" She didn't even have time to scream before the punch landed. The world tilted, pain heat, then cold. She heard laughter, the splash of something hitting water, and a voice saying, "Tell your boss this Sullivan isn't untouchable anymore." She collapsed. Elena woke in her old apartment in River West. Her face was swollen, her lips split, both arms bruised in patterns that looked almost deliberate. She didn't remember who brought her home, only those eyes cold as steel in the rain, and one name echoing in her head. Sullivan. She should have gone to the police, but instinct screamed no. In Chicago, there were names you didn't write in reports. She washed away the blood, wrapped her wounds, and tried to pretend nothing had changed. But the next morning, when she entered the Sullivan Estate, she knew pretending was impossible. The air inside felt different, still tense, as if the house itself held its breath. The other staff spoke in whispers, avoiding each other's eyes. As she polished the marble floor on the 3rd level, the office door opened. Henry Sullivan stepped out. She barely had time to lower her head before his voice stopped her. "Look up." His tone was deep, steady, but carried a command that froze her in place. Elena slowly raised her gaze. Light from the window struck the bruises on her face. For a moment, Henry's gray eyes darkened, as if he'd seen something he didn't want to believe. "Who did this to you? I slipped and fell." He said nothing, only lifted his hand to touch the bruise on her cheek. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, but his eyes were colder than ice. A fall doesn't leave fingerprints. He turned and walked away. Yet a strange chill ran down Elena's spine, not from fear, but from the eerie sense that after tonight, someone would cease to exist. That evening, the city was unnervingly quiet. From the 5th-floor window of her small apartment, Elena watched headlights blur along the highway and listened to the distant horn of a train. A text appeared on her phone. "Don't go out tonight." B. She knew no one named B, and when she looked again, the message had vanished. An hour later, the radio buzzed with breaking news. 2 men found dead at South Pier. Authorities suspect links to organized crime. Elena turned it off, her heart pounding. She didn't know why, but beneath the fear, another emotion stirred, twisted and deep, as if someone out there had protected her in a way the world could never accept. The next morning, when she returned to the Sullivan Estate, a small black envelope rested on the desk she cleaned daily. No name, no seal. She opened it. Inside, one line was written in cold black ink. "No one touches what's mine. H.S." She stood frozen. Wind drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of fresh coffee. For the first time, Elena realized she had stepped into a world where laws weren't written by police, but by a man named Henry Sullivan. She should have been terrified. Instead, her heart beat faster. Somewhere within the mansion, a piano began to play, low, heavy, and solitary. She knew it was him, and within that sound, Elena felt something awakening, an invisible thread binding the unseen woman to the man who had never known the light. When she left the mansion, she looked up at the Chicago sky deepening into blue. Snowflakes drifted down the first of the season. Amid the cold, she whispered to herself, "If this is fate, then I won't run anymore." And far above in the lighted room at the top, Henry Sullivan set down his glass of wine, his eyes following the slender figure walking away. He murmured, voice low, a warning and a confession all at once. "You have no idea who you've just touched, Elena Monroe." If you felt the heartbeat of this story follow to continue our journey between shadow and light in part 2. When his eyes found her. The next morning, Chicago was still draped in a pale silver gray. The skyscrapers reflected the dim light like sleeping beasts veiled in mist. Snow from the night before still lingered on the steps of the Sullivan estate, marked only by the footprints of the last person to leave Elena Monroe. She arrived earlier than usual. The massive mansion was so quiet that even the ticking of the wall clock seemed unnervingly loud. Everything was in perfect order, except for one thing. The office door of Henry Sullivan was slightly ajar, a rare sight. As Elena passed by, she reached out to close it, but a deep voice stopped her. "Come in." The sound froze her in place. Henry stood by the window overlooking the backyard, where snow blanketed the elm trees. He didn't turn around yet. Somehow he knew exactly who was at the door. Elena stepped in quietly. The light from the window traced his shoulders, defining a sharp outline against the dim room, a man both refined and dangerously magnetic. On the desk lay the same black envelope she had received the day before. "Did you send this?" Elena asked softly, barely hearing her own voice. Henry turned. His smoky gray eyes swept over her face, pausing at the faint bruise still visible beneath her makeup. "I don't let anyone touch what's mine." The words landed somewhere between protection and possession. Elena shivered slightly. "I'm not yours, Mr. Sullivan." "Aren't you?" He stepped closer, only a few feet away now. "Then why did they use my name to send a warning?" Elena took a step back, her spine meeting the edge of the desk. The air thickened, the faint scent of whiskey and sandalwood filled the space between them. "I don't know who they are," she said, forcing her voice steady. Henry studied her for a long moment before turning away. "You don't need to. From now on, you won't walk home alone. I'll have someone drive you. That's not necessary." It wasn't a request. His tone was cool, commanding, yet beneath it lingered an unsettling trace of concern. Elena bit her lip, wanting to argue, but his eyes silenced her. By noon, the Sullivan mansion buzzed with rare activity. Sleek black cars lined the driveway. A business meeting with partners, the polite term for underworld negotiations. Elena kept to the far corners of the house, cleaning quietly. But as she passed the second-floor corridor, Henry's voice rose from the main hall, below low, sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "Anyone who lays a finger on what's mine will pay for it." She stopped. She could see it in her mind. Henry seated at the head of the long table, swirling his glass of bourbon under dim lights, while the others bowed their heads in silence. Someone stammered, "I swear none of us." "I don't need oaths. I need results." The soft clink of glass against wood sounded like a verdict. Elena's grip on the mop tightened. For reasons she couldn't name, her chest ached. Evening fell. Henry emerged late from his meeting, his suit dusted with snow and faint traces of cigar ash. He stopped when he saw Elena replacing the flowers in the hallway, her hands trembling slightly from the cold. "You should wear gloves. I'm used to it. You shouldn't get used to pain." She looked up. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent, only the sound of wind through the window and her uneven breathing. Henry watched her as though she were a rare page in a book he couldn't put down, his gaze both tender and possessive. "If anyone's ever hurt you, tell me." "Why?" "So I can make them disappear." Elena gave a faint, sorrowful smile. "You say it as if a human life can just be erased by a word. In my world, it can." His reply chilled her, yet she couldn't look away. Maybe because for the first time she saw the man beneath the mask, someone who only knew how to protect through violence. That night, Henry insisted on driving her home himself, a gesture that left his staff exchanging bewildered glances. He sat behind the wheel in silence, no music, no words. just the steady rhythm of rain against the windshield. When they reached her apartment building, Elena reached for the door, but Henry spoke, his eyes still fixed ahead. "You're being watched." "What?" He handed her a grainy photo, a man in a dark coat standing near her building's entrance. "He's been there 3 times in 2 days. You've been spying on me, I've been protecting what's mine." She froze. The line between protection and control had never felt thinner. "I don't want to be anyone's burden." Henry turned his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You don't understand, Elena. When I choose to protect someone, they stop being a burden. They become the reason." She didn't know how to answer. In that moment, Henry looked less like a crime lord and more like a man carrying a wound too deep to heal. After he left, Elena lingered by her door. Her phone was silent, no calls, no messages. But when she stepped inside, an envelope lay beneath the door. No name, no seal. Inside a single sentence, "He's not your savior. He's the reason you almost died." Elena's hands trembled. A cold wave ran down her spine. She didn't know who had sent it, the police an enemy, or someone playing a cruel game. But one thing was clear, something was being hidden from her. She sat on her bed, her thoughts spinning. Her mother had once worked as a nurse in a private hospital. 2 years ago, she had died of cancer, leaving behind debts. Elena was still paying off. The hospital Elena remembered was owned by Sullivan Healthcare Group. A coincidence or the beginning of a darker circle that wrapped around her life? That night, sleep never came. Elena kept seeing Henry's eyes steady, unreadable, as he said, "No one touches what's mine." Was he protecting her? Or protecting a truth she wasn't meant to uncover? Across the city, Henry Sullivan stood in his dimly lit office, the glow from his monitor reflecting off his face. Franco, his right-hand man, spoke quietly. "Are you sure about keeping that girl close? She doesn't belong in this world." "I know. And yet you still let her stay." Henry didn't answer right away. He looked at a photo on his desk. Elena changing flowers, sunlight brushing her hair like a rare warmth in his cold life. He finally murmured, "Sometimes the things that don't belong to us are the ones we can't let go of." Franco said nothing more. When he left, Henry remained by the window watching the silent snowfall. He knew she would learn the truth one day about the hospital, her mother's death, the debt his company caused. He just didn't know what she would see in him, then hatred or love. Across town, Elena opened an old photo of her mother. Behind it was a hospital invoice stamped with a faded seal, Sullivan Healthcare Group. At the bottom, a signature, Henry Sullivan. The small apartment fell silent. Elena set the paper down, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and doubt. Outside, snow continued to fall thin as the secrets left unspoken. And in her heart, a question began to take shape, one that would change everything. If the man who saved me is the same one who started it all, is that love or punishment disguised as kindness? Morning, in Chicago, carried the scent of melting snow and roasted coffee. Weak sunlight spilled through the fog-wrapped skyline, tracing pale reflections across the glass of the Sullivan mansion. Elena stepped inside, her hands trembling slightly from lack of sleep. She had stayed up all night staring at the hospital bill stamped Sullivan Healthcare Group. Henry Sullivan's name stood out at the bottom like a confession she hadn't asked for. But this morning, she still showed up for work. Not out of fear of losing her job, but because she needed to look him in the eye to know whether what she felt was gratitude or hatred. Henry appeared in the second-floor hallway, crisp white shirt, loosened tie, a cup of steaming espresso in hand. His gaze was cold as the morning frost, but for a fleeting second, something softened in it. Just long enough for her heart to skip. "You're not well, I can still work." "I wasn't talking about your body." The words caught her off guard. Henry brushed past her, the scent of expensive cologne, mixed with gunpowder and burnt wood lingering in the air. She couldn't tell if she was afraid or intoxicated. He stopped, turned slightly. "If you have something to ask me, Elena, ask." His voice was low and faintly sorrowful, but she stayed silent. Fear of sounding weak chained the words inside her throat. By afternoon, the snow had stopped. The main kitchen buzzed with energy as preparations began for a private dinner, an important meeting between Henry and his anonymous investors. Elena was assigned to prepare the grand dining room. Before the guests arrived, she stood quietly by the long white tablecloth, staring at the crystal glasses, scattering the light into tiny rainbows. Everything looked perfect and lifeless. Then the door opened. Henry entered alone. They say you have a talent for arranging things. I just do what I'm told. Do you always make everything perfect for everyone? Elena looked up. He stood close enough for her to see that behind the steel in his eyes, there was something softer, almost regret. I'm not someone special, Mr. Sullivan. You're wrong, he said quietly. It's the ordinary things about you that make people unable to look away. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving only the trace of his cologne and the echo of his footsteps fading down the marble hall. His words lingered in her mind for the rest of the night. Later, after the dinner ended, Elena was called to clean Henry's office, something rarely requested. The door was half open, warm light spilling across the floor. She pushed it gently and froze. Henry sat at his desk jacket off glass of whiskey in hand, eyes fixed on the window. I thought you'd gone to rest. Sleep isn't always rest. His voice was hoarse, tired, but still carried command. She hesitated at the door, but he said, Stay. I need someone to talk to, not someone to clean. She hesitated, then sat across from him. Henry poured another drink and slid the glass toward her. I don't drink. Then just listen to me drink. He tilted his head back. The amber liquid caught the lamplight glowing like liquid fire. You know, in my world, people never ask why. They only care about results. But I've always wanted to understand why people do what they do. Elena said nothing. Henry set down his glass, his gaze landing on the faint scar on her wrist. You used to be a nurse. Elena froze. Just an intern. Before my mother died. I'm sorry, you don't need to be. You had nothing to do with it. Henry looked straight into her eyes, and for a moment she saw it something he wanted to say, but couldn't. No, Elena. I had more to do with it than you think. The sentence fell between them like shattered ice. Before she could respond, the door opened. Franco Henry's right-hand man entered, his voice tense. We've got trouble on the west side. Henry stood immediately, his expression hardening. Who Adrian Vega's men? They're probing the docks. Henry glanced at Elena, voice deep. Go home. Don't leave the house tonight. Where are you going to solve the problem? He reached the door, then paused. If I don't make it back by morning, don't open the door for anyone, not even someone you know. His eyes locked with hers, a warning and something else. She could only nod. The door shut. The silence that followed was suffocating. Near midnight, Chicago erupted in flashes of fire over the harbor. Sirens, helicopters, breaking news flooding the airwaves. An explosion has been reported at the West Side docks. Cause unknown. Police have sealed the area. Elena ran to her balcony, staring at the skyline veiled in smoke. Something inside her broke. She didn't call anyone. She just sat in the dark, clutching her coat, waiting. Hours later, there was a knock, 3 soft, deliberate taps. She froze. Henry's voice echoed in her memory. Don't trust anyone who knocks. Not even someone familiar. She looked through the peephole. It was Franco. His face was grim, streaked with ash. Where's Henry? She asked, voice shaking. Franco held her gaze for a long second before speaking. He's alive, but there's something you need to know. He stepped inside, setting a thin folder on the table. You have the right to know because he never had the courage to tell you. What is this, a medical report? 22. Your mother was a patient at St. Lawrence Hospital, a facility owned by Sullivan Group. Elena opened it. Her eyes stopped at the last line, treatment discontinued due to internal funding withdrawal. Signed, Henry Sullivan. Her breath caught. He signed the order to stop my mother's treatment. Franco didn't answer right away. He was young, not yet in full control. But his name was there, and he knew. He's kept that secret for 2 years. Elena sank into a chair, trembling. The puzzle pieces fell into place, each sharper than the last. Henry had saved her, protected her, but he had also indirectly caused her mother's death. Franco stood, voice heavy. I'm not here to make you hate him. I'm here to make sure you're ready. When he comes back, nothing will be simple anymore. He left, closing the door behind him. The air smelled of paper and smoke. That evening, Henry returned unscathed, but his eyes darker colder. When he saw Elena in the kitchen, he stopped. "I told you not to open the door." "I didn't. Franco had a key." He said nothing, then stepped closer. Reaching for her face, she turned away. "What did you hide from me?" "Henry." Silence thickened. His eyes flickered with something weary and human. "You know. Yes. About my mother. About your hospital. Elena. You let her die. Then you saved me. What for?" "To make amends." Her voice trembled, but every word cut deep. Henry didn't defend himself. For a long moment, he just stood there. Then he spoke quietly. "I didn't know her name then. I signed dozens of files a day. When I found out, it was too late. I can't rewrite the past. The only thing I can do now is keep you safe." "Safety isn't love, Henry." He took a step closer, eyes like storm clouds. "And if I told you I love you, then your love is built on my pain. Then let me bear that pain." Tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but her mind wouldn't let her. He reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder, as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. "I know I'm not a good man, but you're the only thing that makes me want to be one." Whether the words were truth or self-delusion, they pierced through her. She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "Sometimes the best thing you can do for me is let me go." Henry froze. The door closed behind her, leaving him alone in the fading light, the wine in his glass glowing red as blood. Outside, the Chicago sky broke into rain once more. And beneath its sound, Henry Sullivan realized for the first time in his life, there was something he couldn't control. The woman he wanted to protect was the one walking away. 3 days had passed since Elena left the Sullivan estate. Chicago lay under a shroud of cold wind and the lonely wail of ships echoing from the harbor. She had moved into a small apartment in Logan Square, trying to reclaim her old rhythm. Morning coffee, afternoon laundry, quiet evenings watching snowfall beyond the window. But nothing felt the same anymore. She had believed that walking away from Henry Sullivan meant escaping the darkness. Yet, strangely, it was in his absence that she felt most lost. Each time she passed through West Town, where the mansion's lights still glowed like a beacon, she once feared Elena turned her head away. She didn't want to remember. But memory has its own way of betraying people through scents, silences, and dreams. That night, she dreamed of Henry. He stood in the rain shirt, clinging to his body, hands streaked with blood, his eyes calm and unreadable. He walked toward her, saying something she couldn't make out. Then, suddenly, fire erupted behind him, brilliant and violent like the final sunset of the world. Elena jolted awake, heart pounding. Moonlight streamed through the curtain, touching the photo of her mother on the wall. Beneath the frame lay the hospital invoice, evidence of Henry's sin, and beside it a slip of paper that read, "No one touches what's mine." A threat or a vow. She no longer knew. The next morning, Elena went to her part-time job at a small Italian cafe owned by a kind elderly woman named Rosa. The shop was quiet, with only the static hum of an old radio. "Elena, you look tired," Rosa said, pouring her another cup of coffee. "Just trouble sleeping." "Strange thing, child. People only lose sleep when their hearts aren't at peace." Elena smiled faintly. But before she could answer, a black car pulled up outside. 2 men in suits stepped out and entered the cafe. "Miss Monroe," one of them asked. "Yes." "What is it Mr. Sullivan would like to see you, now?" She set her cup down, her heartbeat slowing to a heavy thud. "I don't work for him anymore." The man shrugged. "We're just messengers. Whether you come or not is your choice. But he said if you refuse, the matter at St. Lawrence Hospital might resurface." Elena froze. A chill slid down her spine. "Is that a threat I wouldn't know?" "I only deliver the message." She went. Not out of fear, but to face him. The car rolled down Michigan Avenue past rows of barren trees up the hill, where the Sullivan estate loomed against a gray sky. The iron gates opened slowly, heavy as the past itself. Henry stood waiting on the steps. He wasn't in his usual suit, just a black shirt sleeves rolled up, a strip of white bandage around his wrist. Elena glanced at him, and his eyes cut through her like a blade grazing skin. You sent men to drag me here. I didn't drag you. But if I didn't see you, I think I'd lose my mind. She laughed, sharp and bitter. Lose your mind. Do you know how many people have gone insane because of you? Henry stepped closer, closing the distance between them to a breath. I don't care about them. I care about you. Elena backed away, but he caught her wrist, not harshly, just enough to stop her. Elena, listen. I know what I did was wrong. I can't undo the past, but I can do one thing: never let anyone hurt you again. And what about you? Her voice trembled. Do you think it doesn't hurt to see you? You're the reason I lost my mother, Henry. Indirectly or not, that truth doesn't disappear. He let go. Silence filled the air. Then he turned away, his voice rough and low like wind against stone. If I told you I searched for your mother during her last months, would you believe me? I tried to overturn the order, but the system refused. I went to the hospital myself, but you weren't there. I arrived only when it was too late. Elena froze. He went on. I still remember her face, like yours, calm, but carrying something that never lets you rest. She turned her face away, hiding the tears in her eyes. You say that hoping I'll forgive you. No, I say it because I don't want you to hate me in silence. Henry stepped closer, his fingers brushing her cheek, gentle, remorseful. I'm not asking you to forget Elena. Just don't become a prisoner of what's already gone. She met his gaze, voice barely a whisper. And what about you? Have you escaped your past? He gave a hollow smile. I never escaped it. I just learned to live beside it. That night, Henry didn't let her leave. Not as a command, but as a plea she couldn't refuse. Stay here tonight. I'll have someone drive you in the morning. The city isn't safe. Elena wanted to refuse, but something in his eyes, not authority but genuine fear, silenced her protest. She nodded softly. He arranged a guest room for her on the top floor, its window facing the lake. The wind carried mist inside, stirring the curtains gently. Elena stood by the glass, caught between peace and unease. She heard footsteps. Henry stood at the doorway, holding a wool coat. It's cold here. You'll need this. He laid it on the chair, not crossing the threshold. But his eyes lingered. Why are you doing this? She asked, not turning around. Because I'm afraid. I've lost too many people I couldn't keep. And you think holding someone with power is the same as loving them? No, he said slowly. But it's the only way I know how. She turned then. Moonlight washed over his face, not the ruthless mafia boss, but a weary man trying to relearn how to love like a human being. Elena stepped closer, stopping half a meter away. You don't need to protect me from the world, Henry. Just don't be the world I have to fear. He didn't reply. He only looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. I'll try. Even if it costs me everything. Late that night, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the courtyard below, where Henry stood alone in the snow, smoking, hands buried in his coat pockets. His silhouette looked heartbreakingly solitary. Rosa's words drifted back to her, "You'll only lose sleep when their hearts aren't at peace." And she realized her heart had never been at peace, even when she'd walked away. After a moment, Henry looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. He didn't smile, just gave a small, silent nod. She nodded back. Between two wounded souls, words weren't needed. Something fragile bound them, still both protection and chain. And the Chicago night slipped by unnervingly calm, as if the storm was waiting just beyond the dawn. Dawn slipped through the white curtains, spilling soft light across Elena's face, a face hollowed by another sleepless night. She had dreamed of her mother, of a frail hand clasping hers, and a gentle voice whispering through the wind. Forgive not because they deserve peace, but because you do. The words echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. Down in the courtyard, Henry stood beside his black car. He looked exhausted, but when he saw her coming down the stairs, something in his face softened, a fleeting tenderness Elena had always suspected was temporary, like calm before a storm. Did you sleep? He asked. Not really. I haven't slept peacefully in 20 years. Elena looked at him, lips pressed tightly. Because of power or guilt, Henry gave a faint, weary smile. Perhaps both. Power keeps me alive. Guilt keeps me awake. She said nothing. Only the wind spoke, carrying the chill from Lake Michigan through the air. The morning passed in silence. Elena stayed in the mansion's old library, rereading the worn spines of forgotten books. Henry was nowhere to be seen. Only his low, tense voice drifted through the walls from the office. Every now and then, fragments of his conversation slipped out Adrian Vega. Shipping routes. Betrayal. Handle it tonight. She understood. His world kept spinning in its dark orbit, untouched by sunlight, and she was merely a faint flicker within it, one that could vanish at any moment. By noon, the library door opened. Henry entered, coat draped over his arm, snow melting on his collar. "I thought you'd left." "I haven't decided yet." He sat across from her, eyes steady. "I can help you disappear. Leave Chicago, start over. No one will ever find you. And you, I'll stay." Elena let out a quiet laugh, beautiful and bitter all at once. "You think I need to be rescued from you?" Henry didn't answer, but in his eyes flickered something achingly human, unspoken fear. "Maybe I just need to rescue myself from hurting you again." By dusk, the sky turned lavender gray. Henry led her to the third-floor balcony overlooking the lake. They stood side by side, saying nothing. After a long silence, Elena spoke. "Do you ever feel truly remorseful, Henry?" "I don't believe in remorse. It changes nothing." "Maybe not, but it can save you from becoming a monster." He turned to her, eyes burning like dying embers. "Do you think I'm not already one?" "If you were, you wouldn't be asking me that." Henry gave a small, rueful laugh, low and warm like an old jazz record. "You always say things that make me unable to hate you, even when I should." The wind rose, carrying a few stray snowflakes. Elena shivered, and Henry took off his coat, placing it gently over her shoulders. She began to protest, but he said quietly, "Let me do at least one decent thing." She looked at him, her eyes softening. For a moment, the space between them was no wider than a breath. The fading light brushed her cheek, and for that single heartbeat, Henry forgot everything: the wars, the blood, the guilt. All he saw was a woman whose gaze could silence the chaos of the world. He leaned forward. Elena didn't move, neither welcoming nor resisting. His lips brushed her forehead, a touch that felt both like an apology and a confession that they had crossed too far to ever return. Night fell. Henry left to meet Franco. The mansion was quiet, the only sound the steady ticking of the clock. Elena sat at his desk, her eyes drifting to the half-open safe nearby. She hadn't meant to pry, but something, instinct or fate, drew her closer. Inside, the folders were neatly stacked, but one envelope stood out. Handwritten across it, Elena Monroe, confidential. Her pulse quickened. She opened it. Inside was a copy of the St. Lawrence Medical Fund agreement signed by Henry Sullivan. But a note scribbled in the margin made her breath catch transfer all withheld funds to the private aid account. Beneficiary Nora Monroe, her mother. At the bottom was a rejected transaction report. Henry had tried to cover her mother's treatment with his own money, blocked by the system for conflict of personal interest. He had tried to save her. Elena sank into the chair, trembling. Shame, relief, regret, and something deeper, heartbreak. While she had hated him, he had carried the guilt in silence. The door opened. Henry stepped in snow, still dusting his shoulders. He froze when he saw her holding the envelope. "You read it." Elena didn't answer. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You tried to save my mother, didn't you?" "I did what I should have done. But I was too late." She rose and stepped toward him. "You weren't late, Henry. You just never forgave yourself." He smiled faintly, a sad, breaking smile that caught in her chest. "You speak as if you understand me." "I don't. But I want to." The distance between them vanished. For the first time, Henry pulled her into his arms, not to possess, not to protect, but simply to exist as something human. Elena rested her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong yet unsteady, like that of a man constantly fighting himself. "If one day I have to choose between you and the world," he murmured, voice rough with emotion, "I'll choose you, even if it means losing everything." Elena whispered back her words, barely more than breath. "Don't say that. If you lose everything, you won't be you anymore." He held her tighter. Neither spoke again. They both knew the world outside would never let them rest. But for now, in the haze of smoke and rain, they allowed themselves to believe that love, fragile and tainted as it was, could still be a kind of salvation. Downstairs, Franco stopped in the hallway, glimpsing them through the half-open door. He sighed, his face a mix of worry and pity. Then he turned away, speaking softly into his phone, vague as moving. He knows about the girl. Outside, a snowstorm began to rise, and across the dim lights of the city, the love between the sinner and the broken bloomed a small flame in the winter night, warm and fragile and destined to be tested by the coming storm. Morning in Chicago was veiled in silver mist. Sunlight filtered weakly through the clouds, brushing over the stone steps of the Sullivan estate, making the mansion look like a painting washed in tears. Elena stood by the window, holding a cup of tea she didn't drink. Last night she had let Henry hold her, not out of forgiveness, but because she saw in his eyes a weariness deeper than guilt itself. But now, in the pale light of morning, she felt like a stranger to herself. Between her and Henry lay something nameless, not quite love, not quite absolution. It was both medicine and wound. Henry entered without knocking. He wore a white shirt tie, loosened a faint cut visible on his neck, the trace of a restless night. "You're up early. I couldn't sleep." Because of me, Elena turned her expression a mix of fatigue and teasing. Because of many things. But mostly, yes, because of you. Henry didn't respond. He set his coffee down, his fingers brushing lightly against the back of her neck, a small, almost unconscious gesture. "Don't lose sleep over me. I'm not worth it. You're right. But sometimes the ones who aren't worth it are the hardest to forget." He smiled faintly, that brief smile that made her want to look longer, even though it frightened her. By noon, Henry left the estate for a meeting downtown. Before leaving, he told Franco to keep an eye on Elena. The instruction made her feel more trapped than protected. Restless, she wandered through the mansion, exploring corners she had always avoided before. The gallery, the music room, and finally a small door tucked away at the end of the basement hallway unlocked. Inside was a dimly lit room. The smell of antiseptic mingled with damp wood. Along the walls hung rows of old photographs, women some familiar, some strangers. Elena brushed the dust from one frame and froze. The woman in the photo had soft brown hair and gentle eyes, hauntingly similar to her own. Beneath the frame, a name engraved in small letters, Laura, 2016. Before she could make sense of it, a low voice came from behind her. "She's gone." Elena turned. Franco stood at the doorway, his expression stern but tinged with sorrow. Who was she? The woman Henry once loved. Once she's dead. Killed right here 6 years ago. The room seemed to shrink. Elena stepped back as Franco continued, voice heavy with memory. "She worked here like you, a housemaid. Henry met her back when he was still the coldest man I've ever known. She changed him, and his enemies used her to destroy him." Elena swallowed hard. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see him walking the same road again." That evening, Henry returned. He sensed something different in Elena's eyes, but didn't ask. They ate dinner together in near silence. No music, only the clinking of silverware beneath soft yellow light. Elena finally spoke. "I saw Franco." Henry looked up force, pausing midair. "He told me about Laura." Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. Henry didn't deny it. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "I knew you'd find out eventually." "What was she like you?" he said quietly. "Honest, kind, and foolish enough to think love could change me." Elena's throat tightened. "And you let her die." Henry's gaze locked onto hers. "I killed the man who killed her. But that didn't make me less guilty." He stood, stepping closer, voice low and rough. "I couldn't protect her, so I swore I'd never let it happen again." "Are you protecting me, Henry, or imprisoning me?" The question struck deep. His gray eyes darkened. He turned away. Maybe both. Elena watched his back, feeling a tangle of fear and pity. She knew Henry loved her in his own broken, distorted way. But his love was shifting, warping into something dangerous, an obsession disguised as devotion. That night, Henry vanished. Franco offered no explanation, only that he had personal business. Unable to sleep, Elena roamed the dim corridors. Her shadow stretched across the walls under the weak lights. She stopped at Henry's room. On the desk lay an open leather journal. His handwriting was firm, leaning slightly to the right. Lara said, "I never knew how to love, only how to own." She was right. Elena is different, but I'm afraid if I get too close, she'll die too. The words ended there like a wound left unhealed. Elena touched the page gently, as if her fingers could reach the part of him he kept hidden, even from himself. She closed the book softly. Outside, the sound of an engine echoed through the night. The front door swung open. Henry entered, his white shirt splattered with blood, his face expressionless. Franco followed, grim and tense. Elena ran forward. "What happened?" He raised a hand, signaling her to stop. "It's fine. It's not my blood." The calm in his tone was terrifying. Elena stared at him, emotions twisting inside fear, anger, sorrow. "Is this how you plan to live? Kill, then say, 'It's fine'?" Henry gripped her shoulders, voice hoarse. "You don't understand, Elena. This world doesn't spare the weak. If I don't strike first, they'll take you from me. No one can take me, Henry. But you're the one making me want to leave." Henry froze, as if struck in his most vulnerable place. Then his voice broke raw and quiet. "I'm terrified, Elena. Terrified I'll love you the way I loved her." Elena placed her hand on his chest, feeling the erratic thud beneath his blood-stained shirt. "Then don't love with fear." He looked at her for a long moment, then bent down and kissed her forehead. A kiss unlike the rest. Not hungry, not commanding, but full of desperation. "I don't know if I can love any other way," he murmured. "But I'll try." Elena smiled faintly through tears. "For me? No. For me. Because if I don't, I'll die inside my own shadow." Outside, snow blanketed the city in silence. Henry stood by the window, staring out. Elena rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the weight of his breath thick with fear and the longing to start over. Part of her still doubted him, but another part, quiet and tender, believed that some people could save themselves if only they were loved the right way. And softly she whispered a promise meant for them both. "If you truly want to change, I won't leave." Henry took her hand and held it tight. No more words, only the rhythm of two hearts beating together in a world still storming outside, where guilt and love at last became one. That morning, Chicago was still cold, but no longer calm. The wind swept across the southern harbor, carrying the tang of oil and the lingering scent of gunpowder from the night before. In the small third-floor room of the Sullivan estate, Elena awoke to the distant blare of a siren. She turned over, the blanket slid off her shoulder, and pale morning light traced the exhaustion across her skin. Henry wasn't beside her. On the table sat a folded note next to a steaming cup of coffee. "Don't go outside. I'll be back before sunset." She held the note, a vague unease rising in her chest. Henry's promises to be back soon were rarely true. Each time he said those words, he returned blood-stained eyes. Hollow hands trembling not from rage, but from the one emotion he refused to name, fear of losing her. From the third-floor window, Elena watched the black convoy roll out through the gates. Franco sat in the front seat, face carved in stone. Henry was in the back, staring toward the pale gray horizon, perhaps toward the battle he already knew had no victor. Elena pressed her palm against the glass. She hated this feeling, being left behind in his world, where everything was measured in two words: protection and loss. By afternoon, light snow began to fall. Elena went to the kitchen to make tea, her hands moving automatically as she turned on the radio. The announcer's voice was low and grave. "A large explosion has occurred at Dock 7 West Harbor. 3 dead, 2 injured. Authorities suspect links to organized crime." The cup slipped from her hands and shattered across the floor. She ran to the telephone, trembling so badly she dialed the wrong number twice. Franco didn't answer. Neither did Henry. She tried to calm herself, but when she heard the words "victims yet to be identified," her mind went blank. Evening fell. Elena stood on the mansion steps, wind and snow swirling around her eyes, fixed on the empty road ahead. Every sound, the crack of branches, the whisper of the wind, made her heart jump, until headlights flared in the distance. Henry's black car pulled up to the gate. Franco stepped out first, then Henry, no blood this time, but his shirt was torn. his wrist wrapped in white gauze, his eyes cold and unreadable. Elena ran to him. "You're hurt." He shook his head. "It's nothing. It was always nothing." But this time the word broke her. "Stop saying that, Henry. Every time you leave, I don't know if you'll ever come back." Henry looked at her for a long moment, then gripped her shoulders gently, his voice low and hoarse. "If I hadn't come back tonight, maybe you'd finally be safe." "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer, just guided her inside. Behind them, Franco's heavy gaze met hers. He shook his head slightly silently, urging, "Not now." The study was dim. Henry sat before a glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid slowly between his fingers. Elena sat across from him, eyes still swollen with tears. She spoke quietly. "What are you hiding from me?" Henry looked up, exhaustion clouding his gray eyes. "Vega knows about you, Strian Vega. The man who killed Lara." He nodded. "He thinks you're the way to break me. Today he sent men to the docks in ambush. And you went there to end it." Elena clenched her fists. "End it with blood." Henry exhaled slowly. "There's no other way. In my world, only survivors get to love." His words struck deep. A part of her understood, another part broke at the thought. She rose, walked closer to him. "If I left you, would you still have to fight?" Henry looked up, his eyes dark and endless. "If you left, I'd still fight, but I'd have no reason to win." Night fell heavy, blanketing the city in silence. Elena couldn't sleep. She heard Henry's footsteps pacing the hallway, steady, tense, the sound of a man trying to hold together a crumbling world. Then the sound of shattering glass. She bolted upright and ran out. A bullet had pierced the living room window. Henry pulled her to the floor, shielding her with his body, as gunfire erupted outside. Franco shouted from the back hall. "They're coming from the rear entrance." Elena trembled, feeling Henry's breath hot and fast against her hair. He drew his gun and whispered near her ear. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, don't come out." "Henry?" He tightened his grip on her shoulder. "I promise if I make it out alive, I'll take you far away from all this." Then he was gone. Gunfire roared through the corridors. Franco barked orders. Men shouted, the house filled with smoke and chaos. Elena covered her ears, tears streaming, but when she heard Henry's voice raw and furious through the gunfire, she couldn't stay back any longer. She ran toward the sound. The hall was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of gunpowder. Franco saw her and yelled, "Elena, get back!" But it was too late. A shadow moved behind a doorway, gun raised. Henry turned just in time, lunging forward to shove her aside. The gun went off. Elena fell not from the bullet, but from the weight collapsing over her. Henry. Blood spread warm and thick across her hands. Henry. He was still conscious, jaw clenched in pain. "It's fine." He managed a weak smile. "Just a scratch." She shook him, tears spilling down her face. "You're a terrible liar. I just didn't want you to be afraid." Franco's men rushed in, dragging down the shooter amid shouts and confusion. Elena barely heard them. The world had narrowed to the man bleeding in her arms. Henry's grip tightened around her hand, his voice fading. "Don't cry. I promised no one would ever touch you. Not even fate." Her voice broke. "You idiot. You just let fate take you instead." He smiled faintly. "Because of you. I still feel human." Blood seeped through his shirt, pooling on the marble floor. Franco knelt beside him, voice urgent. "The medics are on their way. Stay with me, Henry." Henry's gaze lingered on Elena, his gray eyes dimming. He tried to speak, but only a shallow breath escaped. "If I don't make it, don't hate the world for me." Elena leaned down, pressing a trembling kiss to his forehead. "Be quiet, Henry. You'll make it. A man like you doesn't get to leave that easily." An hour later, the ambulance pulled away from the estate. Franco stayed behind to clear the scene. Elena sat inside the vehicle, clutching Henry's cold hand. His face was pale, his breath shallow. Through the frost-streaked window, she watched the city lights blur like fragments of 1,000 broken memories. And softly, to no one but herself, she whispered, "If the price of being loved is blood, I'll pay it. But this time you have to live. For me and for yourself. The ambulance sped into the night. Outside, the snow kept falling quiet, endless, like the fragments of two souls still learning how to love in hell. That night, rain poured over Chicago. It lashed against the glass like 1,000 restless fingers, sharp, metallic, and cold, echoing the heartbeat of someone teetering between life and death. Elena sat by the hospital bed, her small hand clasping Henry's motionless one. He hadn't woken since the 6-hour surgery. The room smelled of antiseptic and steel. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only fragile proof that he was still here, still breathing, still fighting, still the man she both loved and feared. There were dried stains of blood on her sleeve. His blood. That dark red, no matter how many times she washed it away, refused to leave her memory. Franco entered holding a medical file. His face was its usual mask of composure, but his eyes carried something quieter, a hint of weariness. "The wound isn't fatal," he said softly, "but he lost a lot of blood. It'll take weeks to recover." Elena nodded faintly, her voice trembling. And Vega Franco turned toward the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Gone, but he'll be back. And this time, his gaze hardened. He won't just come for Henry. A chill ran down Elena's spine. "You mean he'll come for me?" Franco didn't hesitate. "You're Henry's only weakness." 2 days later, Henry woke up. The first thing his eyes met was the sterile white ceiling, and then her face. Tired, pale, but smiling softly. "You still owe me a promise," she whispered, her hand never leaving his. Henry's eyes fluttered shut. His voice was weak, yet still carried that deep, unyielding tone. "I remember. I promised to take you away from here." "No," she murmured. "You promised to live. The rest, we'll figure out later." He smiled faintly, then turned his gaze aside. "You don't understand Elena. I was born into a world with no escape. If I walk away, others die in my place. So you'll stay just to die instead. If my death could end it all, maybe it's worth it." Elena stood abruptly, her voice breaking. "You keep talking about protecting me, but you've never once thought that maybe I could protect you too. Henry, you're not some savior. You're a man, and I want you to live like one." Silence filled the room. Henry looked at her, really looked, his gray eyes deep and dark as storm clouds. Then softly he said, "Maybe I've never been afraid of anything until I was afraid of losing you." That night while Henry slept, Franco met Elena in the corridor. The yellow light flickered over his lined face and weary eyes. "You should leave, Elena. I'm not going anywhere. Listen to me. Vega won't stop. He's lost too much because of Henry. You're the quickest way to break him. If I leave, Henry will find me. If I stay, Vega will come. So tell me, Franco, where exactly can I hide?" Franco said nothing. Elena's tone softened. "How long have you been with him? 18 years. Then you know there are only 2 things keeping him: human guilt. And me." Franco studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Then remember this: if you love a wolf, you must be ready to walk into the forest." 2 weeks passed. Henry recovered slowly, pushing himself to walk before the doctors allowed it. Elena stayed close, watching him grit his teeth through the pain. Sometimes in the sleepless hours of night, he would hold her hand and whisper, "If I ever had another life, maybe I'd just be a man who makes coffee, and you'd be the girl who reads by the window." "And what would you do?" she asked softly. "I'd write your name on every cup, just to remind myself I'm still alive." She smiled through the ache in her chest, because they both knew those other lives would never belong to them. One gray afternoon, Henry was finally discharged. Franco drove. Elena sat beside Henry, watching his eyes as they followed the rain-blurred skyline. Something had changed in them, calmer but deeper. The look of a man who'd already decided his fate. "What are you hiding from me this time, Henry?" He smiled faintly, eyes still on the road. "A man who's been shot and lived can't go back to giving orders. I need to end this once and for all. Vega. Him, yes, but not just him. The whole council that turned against me." Elena grasped his hand. "Promise me, whatever happens, you'll come back." He finally turned toward her, his gaze gentle but resolute. "I promise, even if I have to crawl out of hell to do it." That night, as Henry and Franco left for the meeting, Elena stayed behind in the mansion alone with the sound of wind pressing against the glass. She wandered the halls, his coat still draped over the chair, the coffee cup marked with her lipstick, the framed photo of them together on one of his rare smiles. Then the phone rang. An unknown number. She answered, heart pounding. "Elena Monroe, I thought you should know Henry Sullivan was ambushed on the south side. If you want to see him one last time, come." Her breath caught. That voice unmistakable. Adrian Vega. Elena flew from the mansion, driving into the storm. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the road into streaks of gold and gray. She didn't know if the wetness on her face was rain or tears. Only that every time she pressed the gas, her heart clenched harder. When she reached the abandoned district on the city's edge, she stopped. Ahead, a dim yellow light flickered through a warehouse window. Inside, shouting gunfire, a man's scream. She ran in. Henry sat bound to a chair, blood at the corner of his mouth. Across from him stood Vega, gun in hand, his smile colder than the rain outside. "Did he make you believe in love?" Elena Vega sneered. "He killed my sister. Now it's his turn to pay." Elena trembled, stepping in front of Henry. "If you're going to kill someone, kill me. But don't touch him." Vega laughed. "Love really does make people stupid." He raised his gun. Even half-conscious, Henry roared Vega. "If you want me dead, shoot me, but don't touch her." For a heartbeat, Vega hesitated just one. It was enough. From behind, Franco appeared and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the warehouse. Vega fell. Elena dropped to her knees, trembling. Henry tried to stand but collapsed into her arms. She caught him, holding him tightly as his blood spread through her shirt again. But this time, he smiled faintly, whispering, "Told you I'd come back." Elena nodded through tears, pressing her forehead against his. "And you did, Henry. You came back." Outside, the rain finally stopped. All that remained was the scent of gunpowder, the metallic tang of blood, and the fragile warmth of two souls who dared to love amid the ruins. 4 days after the shootout on the outskirts of Chicago, the news mentioned only one line. Businessman Henry Sullivan critically injured in a mysterious attack. Police are investigating. But the truth, what really happened, was known to only 3 people, Henry, Elena, and Franco. The hospital was quieter this time. Henry lay in a private room, its window overlooking a snow-covered park. Light from the snow reflected off the white walls, bathing the space in a pale, ghostly glow, like the soul of someone not yet ready to leave. Elena sat beside the bed, her hair loose, her face hollow from sleepless nights. She hadn't left his side since the moment Franco dragged them out of that blood-soaked warehouse. The bullet wound on Henry's shoulder had been stitched. His heart still beat faint, fragile, as if it owed the world one last debt. Elena clasped his hand, her voice a whisper. "Can you hear me? It's over now." Henry's lips parted, though his eyes remained closed. His words came out low and rough. "Over, Elena. For me, every ending is just the beginning of another nightmare." His voice was weak, but every syllable cut through her heart. 3 days later, Henry was fully conscious. The doctor insisted he rest for weeks, but Henry demanded that Franco bring him documents. Elena was furious, yet powerless to stop him. "You're seriously working while still hooked to an IV." Henry gave a tired smile, his voice deep but unsteady. "I once learned how to control the world, Elena. Now there's only one thing I can't control: time. It moves on whether I lie here or stand up. If you don't stop, you'll die. If I stop, I'll lose you." Her breath caught. She wanted to say she'd never leave, but the way he looked at her said it all. Men like Henry never got to keep the people they loved completely. One afternoon, Franco entered carrying a thick envelope. He placed it on the table. Elena glanced at it curiously, but Henry brushed her hand aside. "Don't read it." "What is it, Will?" She froze. "What did you just say?" Henry looked straight at her, his gray eyes calm, almost too calm. "I don't know how much time I have left. Vega might be gone, but his empire isn't. I need to make sure that if something happens to me, you'll be safe." Elena rose abruptly, her voice breaking. "You're leaving me again, aren't you?" Henry closed his eyes, his voice barely more than a breath. No, I'm trying to keep you somewhere my blood can't stain. That night, Elena sat on the hospital balcony. Below, her melting snow shimmered under the yellow streetlights, reflecting on bare winter branches. She thought about the first time she met Henry, the cold, sharp-eyed man who still reached out his hand when she fell. She had once thought he saved her out of instinct. Now she knew he saved her because he needed proof that he could still be human. Looking up, she could see the faint outline of him through the third-floor window. Tall, solitary, like a man who'd escaped hell, but still couldn't believe in the light. She whispered to the night, "If your love is a flame, then I'll let it burn me. Because even that fire is warmer than the silence of this world." The next morning, Henry insisted on being discharged. The doctors protested, but he refused to listen. Franco arranged the transport. Elena went along unease, heavy in her chest. The car stopped before a small wooden cabin outside the city, not a mansion, not guarded, just quiet air and the scent of pine. Henry sat by the window, speaking softly. "I bought this place for Laura. She never got the chance to come." Elena said nothing. He rarely spoke of the past, but this time his tone wasn't guilt, only sorrow. "She died because of you, Henry, and you're living because of me." He met her gaze, voice rough. "Both are wrong. I never learned how to love without hurting someone." Elena moved closer, sitting across from him. "Then let me teach you." Henry let out a faint laugh, but it faded almost instantly. "Love can't be taught. It can only be endured." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver ring, old scratched. "I once planned to propose to Laura with this." Her eyes softened. "You kept it all this time to remind myself never to love again. But then, you happened." He placed the ring on the table between them. Light gleamed faintly on its cold surface. "I don't know if I deserve to wear it, or to let you wear it." Elena's voice trembled, yet was steady with conviction. "No one deserves love, Henry. You only get to choose whether you dare to have it." She picked up the ring and slipped it onto his finger, not as a promise, but as a shared scar. That evening, the wind rose and Franco received a call. He entered the room, face tense. "Henry Vega's men are regrouping. Rumors say they want revenge." Elena's eyes widened in fear. "No, you just recovered." Henry stood calm as ever. "If I hide, they'll find us. If I go to them, at least I control the game." Elena caught his hand, gripping it tightly. "You promised me you'd live." Henry leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. "I will. But sometimes to live, you have to walk through the darkness one more time." Franco's voice was gravelly resigned. "I'll go with you. But this time, don't look back." Henry gave a faint smile. "No. This time I have to look back because the woman I love is standing behind me." Elena walked him to the door. The wind carried the scent of rain and smoke. She touched the scar on his hand, her voice barely above a prayer. "You'll come back, won't you?" He smiled the saddest, most beautiful smile she had ever seen. "If I don't just believe I'm still on my way." Then he left, without looking back. Elena stood there for a long time, watching the headlights fade into the fog. She knew their love would never know peace, only truth. And sometimes that truth was enough to keep living, even when tomorrow could be light or shadow. That night, the rain returned. On the table, the silver ring still carried his warmth. Elena picked it up, holding it tightly in her palm, and for the first time in months, she smiled, a fragile smile caught between fear and hope. Somewhere out there, Henry was facing his final demons. And she knew whatever the ending, they had already loved each other with everything a human heart could give. That morning, Chicago was eerily quiet. Snow blanketed the streets, the rooftops, and even the memories of those who had survived the storm of blood. The city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, or for someone to return. Elena sat by the wooden window of the small cabin Henry had once chosen. On the table, a half-burned candle flickered weakly, its light reflecting off the silver ring she still wore. A week had passed. No news, no calls, no sign. Every morning she stepped out onto the porch, gazing down the pine road where he had disappeared that night. And every time the wind blew, she could swear she heard the sound of tires of footsteps crunching on gravel as of his low voice calling her name Elena. But there was only the wind and snow. That afternoon, Franco appeared. He entered in a thick coat, his face lined with exhaustion. Elena rushed to him, eyes full of hope. But her smile faded when she saw the fresh cut on his cheek. "Where is he?" she asked, voice trembling. Franco was silent for a long moment before replying quietly. "Vega's men are gone. Wiped out. But Henry hasn't come back." No, that's impossible. He promised me." "He did," Franco said softly. "And he always keeps his word in his own way." Elena stepped back, tears streaming down her face. Franco placed something gently on the table, Henry's silver pocket watch. Inside the cover was a small, folded note. "If I can't return, then live for me. Love is the courage to admit our weakness and still choose to believe in tomorrow." She clutched the paper tightly, her shoulders shaking. Franco stood beside her, his voice low and steady. "You know, Elena, Henry was never afraid of dying, but he was terrified of being forgotten. And somehow I think he's still alive through the woman he loved." Days passed and the snow finally stopped. Elena cleaned the cabin, scrubbing every corner, as if he might walk in at any moment. She planted new flowers by the porch, and every morning she placed a cup of coffee on the table, black, no sugar, just the way he liked it. One afternoon, when sunlight broke through the clouds, she began to write. Page after page filled with their story, not as a tragedy, but as a song of redemption. "You once said our love was wrong, but to me it was the only thing that ever felt right." She paused, staring out the window. A soft wind stirred, sending one of the pages fluttering to the floor. As she bent to pick it up, the faint sound of a car drifted through the silence. Just one sound, but enough to stop her heart for a beat. The door opened. Henry stood there, thinner, paler, a new scar on his cheek. But his eyes, still the same deep, weary, and alive. Elena froze. She couldn't speak, only stepped forward, her trembling hand brushing his face. You're alive." He smiled, faint but warm. "I told you I'd come back." She threw her arms around him, sobbing like a child. They stood there in the doorway, wrapped in light and breath and tears, as the sun broke through the clouds behind them. Henry whispered, "I didn't think I'd make it. Franco pulled me out of the wreckage. I was unconscious for 3 days. When I woke up, the first thing I thought of was you." Elena laughed softly through tears. "And the second?" He tilted his head, his voice rough and low. "To make a cup of coffee, the kind you hate most." They both laughed, the fragile, breathless laughter of people who had walked through hell and somehow still found each other. That night, the fire crackled in the hearth. Henry sat beside it, turning the silver ring she had once placed on his hand. The glow of the flames danced across his eyes. "I used to think love was a weapon, a way to control. But losing you taught me love is the only thing that makes a man willing to let go." Elena rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, "You didn't lose me, Henry. You just lost yourself for a while." He squeezed her hand, murmuring, "If there's another life, I don't want power or fear. I just want to be an ordinary man. One who can hold your hand on a crowded street without worrying the world might collapse." Elena smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "And I'll be the foolish woman who still believes a mafia boss can love for real." They looked at each other, and no more words were needed. Outside, the snow melted into quiet streams. Inside, their hearts beat together, slow, steady, and real. A year later, a small cafe in downtown Boston opened its doors. The sign read, "Cafe Silver Hour." Inside, the air smelled of roasted coffee and soft jazz. A man with a faint scar on his wrist stood behind the counter, pouring coffee with careful hands. Beside him sat a woman, writing in her notebook, glancing up from time to time with a smile. Most customers never noticed, but every cup of coffee carried a single letter written in milk foam, sometimes an E, sometimes an H. When asked, Elena simply said, "They're the initials of a promise." Henry looked over, his eyes gentle as sunlight after rain. She smiled back. No words were needed because their love was no longer a vow in darkness, but a quiet peace in the daylight of ordinary life. Life never waits for the perfect people. It simply rewards those who dare to love, to forgive, to believe that even in hell, two souls can still find each other. Henry and Elena, two blood-stained hearts, finally found their light not at the end of the road, but in each other's heart. Sometimes love doesn't need to save the world. It only needs to save two people who've been lost for far too long. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories come alive and reach more hearts.